call the August 12 meeting of the Leitchfield Planning Commission to order. April, would you please call the roll?
Yes, sir. Commissioner Whitmore. Commissioner Mudd.
Here.
Chairman Buckles.
Here.
Commissioner Clemens.
Here.
Vice Chair Bocock.
Here.
Commissioner Heck.
Here.
All right, thank you, April. And staff is present, as well as our counsel, Mr. Vickery. You have the minutes on the back of your agenda. Pretty short and sweet. I think this may be the first time you're seeing these, so once you have seen them, I've got Tim's signature on one, so he must think that they're ready to go. Tim, will I take that as a motion? You accept the minutes as?
Yes, sir, you can.
All right, got a motion from Tim, and whenever there's a second, I'll be ready for it.
Second.
Missy with the second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right, minutes are approved. Roll call, order. Any visitors? All right, that brings us to old and unfinished business. We talked about during last meeting that we would be awaiting the action of the Leitchfield City Council on how to adopt medical cannabis. My understanding, there were three different choices that the City Council could take. It was opt in, opt out, or do nothing. And do nothing would have basically accepted what the county had decided to do. But after a discussion, they have decided to opt in. And so now it's the charge of the Leitchfield Planning Commission to implement, from a land use standpoint, how those facilities may decorate our landscape and any particular restrictions. So I know we were all the benefit of an email on Friday with different examples and also a recommendation from Tyler. But Tyler, instead of going through all that again, why don't you just kind of take over and tell us where we are and where we need to get to, and maybe even your recommendation.
So we just have to, of course, there's KRSs that we have to abide by as minimum standards. We can implement further restrictions, but we do need to, first point, decide where we would allow these different businesses to be. I did put some in there as far as dispensaries. I think just the commercial zone for that. But then you've got the safety compliance facilities, which is basically the testing labs. So I would say the public institutional zone, since it already allows for laboratories, it kind of coincides. And then light industrial. And then as far as the cultivator, processor, and producers, the actual growing and harvesting, light industrial and agricultural zones. I wanted to stay away from our heavy industrial zones because we're limited on industrial property anyways, and I think we need to save as much of that property as possible for industrial developments of other forms.
Okay.
So as far as usage and what zones, that's kind of what I was thinking. I don't know if anybody else has anything to add to that, or.
I had, and I'm sure you all have read through some of these or all of these, but of the examples that were provided, I found that Burnside was almost the most simple and most direct, and I thought, well, that's plain speak and probably takes care of it. But the further I got, Richmond is a much bigger city than Leitchfield. But so from an ideology standpoint, I think that Burnside has it pretty well locked in and would be worth emulating or getting close to. But the further I got in looking at Richmond, their definitions were much more healthy. They explained better. They even get into situations where permitted and prohibited uses specifically to certain zones, so that while certain things might be allowed in a zone that would be appropriate, you could explicitly say that certain things were not allowed in that zone. And I don't know that we want to get overly complicated in that regard, but I like the adage, start with the end in sight. So wherever we think we might be going with this, we probably need to address it now. And the conversations that Tyler and I have had recently were, let's don't think about this from the standpoint of one. Let's think of this from the standpoint of three, or let's think about this if we're crossing the threshold into something beyond medical, so that, because that is our charge as the body, we're probably the organization locally that's most charged with looking the furthest into the future and taking action now that help get us to those points. So I think primarily, it's obvious that KRS dictates where we are in relation to a school, and that makes sense. Burnside explicitly lists as a church or a house of worship, which I think is reasonable, and Tyler and I had talked about those. And then they have specifically not within 500 feet of a residential zone. So even in places where a commercial zone and a residential zone might meet, it's not ideal, but they do, that you couldn't be within 500 feet of that. One of the things that Tyler and I did just for the purpose of an exercise was to say, okay, if this zone is allowed and this is the restriction from school, church, daycare, let's go through our community and find a qualifying place. Because, you can say it's allowed, but then you can legislate it out of existence by saying, well, it can't be within 50 miles of this. Well, obviously, nothing would qualify. So these are kind of the things that we have to think through, that is it reasonable, is it practical? We're just having to protect from schools, correct? But everything
Schools
else is an
and
elective?
daycares.
Schools
So,
and daycares.
So I did go through and looked at the PVA map and looked at churches and public parks. If we put a restriction for distance from a church or a public park, we will completely take away everything on 259 north and south, all the way out to the bypass on the north end of town. And then that also takes out 62 Mill Street side for quite a distance.
Right.
There's so many of them, they're kind of scattered out, but when you look at 1,000 feet, they're all close enough that it takes every bit of the property that's available or could be available away.
Everything's pretty compressed in that regard. I did notice, and you all probably notice as well, that Richmond has the specification. It's a distance from a facility that youth might be present at, whether it's a basketball court or whether it's a public pool or, something that would attract youth. So that, that's something that they did, but it's not, it's, again, by ordinance, the state takes care of schools and daycares. We have to decide what our threshold is for the rest. So with that much information on the table, does anyone so far have thoughts or anything to add, or a feeling of where we are and what's important in this regard?
Tyler mentioned just a second ago on the testing, your recommendation on that was public and institutional as well as light industrial?
Yes.
Both? Well, public and institutional, I may be missing something, but if you're going to have a facility, if you rent it, buy it, or whatever, there's not much it's zoned public and institutional that you could buy or rent, is there? I mean, most of that's going to be government, hospital, so
Right.
it would pretty much, to me, eliminate that whole zone, because they're not going to allow it, I'm sure, at the hospital, or they're not going to allow it in other institutional areas, I don't think. That's just my thought. So whether we might want to just say light industrial.
Well, some instances, and with that in mind, I was trying to come up with something
That is
with
public and
a
institutional.
practical
Yeah.
place that's public and institutional. And if we said, and it's probably not going to be zoned that unless it belongs to a municipality or some quasi-governmental agency. But I guess, as an example, if the city had purchased, where the Public Works and Planning Office is right now, but purchased 40 acres that was zoned P&I, and they decided to only use 20 of it and sold 20 to something else, then I think that's an instance where we wouldn't mind it being adjacent to that type of use. Now, that might be quite the needle to thread, but that's the only working example that I can come up with where we might even run into that. So Kendall might have a valid point.
Our hospital and then the assisted living nursing homes are also zoned public institutional, so
There's not a lot of area that's. light
no, there's
industrial
not
either.
very much.
I mean, even light industrial, there's not a lot of that in the city zoned, is there? As I recall, what I remember.
No.
So it would be limiting it considerably, I guess, for those zones, so.
Refresh my memory on churches. Is that public and institutional or just?
Some of them are, and some of them are residential. A church can be built in practically any zone we have.
Right. I think I knew that we originally, the initial land use map was made. I think that was the designation that was used for most existing at that time. Then there are things that have been converted, but I guess it begs the question again, do we have, we have church buildings that change back into other things a lot, and we have old buildings that change into churches, but if you had something that had been used as a church that was P&I, and then it ceased to be that, and it met the qualification to be within X distance from a school, daycare, and any other restriction, would we say that that was okay by putting it in the public and institutional? So, thoughts from anyone other than us on that so far? Stick to light industrial, keep P&I.
My opinion would be put the testing and the dispensaries all in C1, but would see why that would not be, or why that would be a problem.
Okay.
It may be a problem, but I don't.
What, so what's,
Well, I don't know what size a testing facility, if there's a requirement on, like the cultivators and things like that, they have a minimum size requirement of the facility. I'm not sure if there's a requirement for the testing facility, but if it is and it's 10,000 square feet, that would be a very large piece of property that was zoned
Like I say,
commercial.
that's ignorance on my part as far as what the testing would consist of.
Yeah.
I would be thinking like a laboratory, like an office building,
Yeah, I wouldn't think that it would be
that big.
large, but I don't know for sure. I would have to do a little bit more research on that.
but, so it's not, a testing facility wouldn't necessarily be a forward-facing entity. It would blend in most likely.
Wouldn't even know what it was, probably.
You wouldn't know, if you didn't know what it was, you wouldn't know what it was. It's not, there's not a smokestack and that type of thing where there are any other indicators of what's going on there. So maybe that's not that much of a concern, but it's worth looking into to find out.
It's actually a cannabis processor, isn't it?
Well, you have a cultivator, a processor, and a producer, but then you have a safety compliance facility, which is in between those three and dispensary. It's like their quality control type.
Kind of a clearinghouse type of approach.
Why would that take up any space?
Like I said, I don't know that it will, but I don't know that there's not a requirement on that structure.
I don't know whether it will or it won't either. I don't know until something gets built.
I don't know anything about it.
So while you all mull that over just a little bit more on what the most important criteria is and whether I think the churches are likely to be considered, but not necessarily a necessity. The parks are to be considered, but not necessarily a necessity. Those are why we're having the discussion. Tyler, can you take us back through, I know you took me through it, can you take us through the timeline where we are? So to accommodate the city, and specifically the city council, what is our timeline and as far as the decisions that we need to make in order to make a recommendation to the council that says, here's where you go so that they can hit their marks?
So the council, in order to accept the ordinance, of course, we have to present it to them. Once they accept what we send them, then they have to read the ordinance 2 different times, 2 different meetings.
It's the same
And-
process we have.
So, but
And
they
it
can
has to be
take,
published.
okay, but if they, okay, not that they're going to do this, but they can approve that in December and be ready for, I mean, my point is if it's available, and it's going to be available, and we may not win the lottery, but theoretically, for July 1st, the city council can, in their second meeting in July, say, here's where it's allowed. So from a practical standpoint, how quickly do we need to act to make sure that maximum opportunity exists?
We have to have our part done and to the council for their approval no later than the first meeting in December. That's the absolute latest. And that's, if, we need to give them opportunity, though, to read over what we send them,
Sure.
because they also have the opportunity to say, no, we don't like this, we want to see this change or whatever. But if we come up with something, we need to have our hearing no later than the October meeting. That gives them time to say yes or no. If they say no, that gives us time to make changes and still get everything done by January 1.
But we're really not doing anyone any favors by waiting that long. In fact, we're just,
Right.
because
I mean, the
until we
quicker-
decide what we're doing, no entrepreneur, even if they were to receive a license, could act upon it because we're sitting on our thumbs.
Right.
Mark, I have a question for Tyler.
Yeah, go right ahead, Tim.
Tyler, will our zoning restrictions play any part in the lottery decisions on which community?
No, it's straight lottery. They draw it out.
Okay,
Yep.
that's it.
Well, Mark, you also said that you and Tyler had done a prelim as far as the distances, and I think I would, and I think most of us would have some respect for the churches and the parks, but if the 1,000 feet is too much, then potentially consider something less. To something that would be reasonable, but doable,
Right.
but practical.
The South Main disqualification, based upon your hypothetical that you ran, is all about City Park?
South Main?
Yes.
No, there's 3 churches right here.
Well, I know this one, of course.
There's a church right over here, right off the bypass. The one in Southgate Mall, and then the one just south of Southgate Mall.
Going up on the hill up there.
Okay, all right, so that's a good example. Let's use those 3 from an optics standpoint. So think about South Main from City Hall south. Would you have a problem with a dispensary from this point south, based upon where you know the landscape of the churches are? And however you answer that question kind of gives you an idea on whether we can bring in from were you using 1,000?
I was using 1,000.
Okay.
And actually, with those in mind, you wouldn't be able to probably go over 400 or 500 if that. Probably.
I'm thinking, so from this church down here, from their property line, 1,000 feet south, where Subway is sitting is 1,000 feet.
But looking at the 259 corridor with these 3 that we're talking about, you couldn't exceed over 300 to 400 feet.
Oh,
and
no.
have anything within
I mean, I would-
259.
I would venture to say to keep this stretch open, you're looking at probably 250, maybe 300 feet.
The 250 number came to me while we were just having this discussion, which basically eliminates next door.
I think that's reasonable,
That makes
personally.
sense.
Yeah.
And I think that we're doing with that, and please, if anyone disagrees, feel free to say so. I think we're protecting that community when we're not required to by law, but I think it's an important consideration to show that of what we're attempting to do is integrate what the state of Kentucky says we have to integrate, but not to just let it go
No.
anywhere that
Let me say this.
they might decide. Yes, Dave?
There's one thing that concerns me here. Some of these ordinances, I think, were good with, they qualified that with regard to residential. They defined it, they talked about the distance between a residential structure as opposed to another business. So that's something I think you need to keep in mind. The other thing that concerns me is this, is you've got a church down here in Southgate Mall. Are you gonna if you put that qualification in there, that's gonna eliminate the Southgate Mall?
True.
I don't know, you're gonna have some people probably gonna be upset about that. I don't know. I just wanted to throw that out. You don't think
I think that's a consideration for the business people of the community.
Right.
Because that is rental property and
It's rental property.
prime
Yeah,
location.
true.
Concerned about it.
Yeah.
Well, and I think the question, and again, kind of a hypothetical that you have to ask yourself when choosing where you think the distances or the threshold should be is, who would you rather answer to in this case? The person that you're limiting where the dispensary can go, or would the church not feel protected if we allowed it to go next door to them? And where's the happy medium between those two? Because we have to serve both groups, or at least anticipate the needs and feelings of both groups. And that's why we're having the discussion.
Well, I think the Southgate Mall is a prime example of it's probably, you're not going to suit all parties any way you
That's
go.
true.
So there is going to have to be some give and take on that.
I mean, from a small government standpoint, it makes you wonder if you remove enough fangs from it, is it worth putting in place to start with? Just playing devil's advocate there a little bit.
Could they use any of that as an exclusive use zone, Tyler, if somebody come before us?
Not with this.
Not with that?
No, not with this, under this particular section.
Yeah, because
Okay.
if we're putting it permitted in a certain zone, then that knocks out exclusive use already.
It doesn't really apply to this.
And some of our examples, I know, made reference to C1 and C2, but do we have anything that's C2? We just.
All we have is a C1, B1, and B2. We don't have a C2 zone.
I hadn't seen one, so I was just making sure that that's worthy of, you can't even really, in this case, do it in a feathered way. You know, like you can't, yes to C1, but not to C2 to C3, because we just haven't had any, we've never had any differentiation between commercial zones. It's sort of all or nothing. Larger communities, obviously, you get shades of gray between those. It's different sizes of commercial operations. And then sometimes you can you could nest something like this inside one of those, but as Dave and Tyler are pointing out, it's kind of all or nothing in that zone, unless we put some type of caveat in there that's, what we're talking about, so. And are there any other concerns so far that we haven't covered that anyone feels strongly about?
Well, we're going to have some ordinances and stuff, or what's already on the books will have to be enforced. We can zone stuff and put it in a postage stamp, but if people are going to break laws, they're going to break laws by utilizing that type of material wherever. And so the enforcement of the laws on the books are going to have to take precedence, I feel, over trying to zone into a very small box, if that makes sense.
Well, I think another option on the distance thing, and this would be kind of a gray in-between option, would be no dispensaries or anything to do with this immediately adjacent to the churches and the playgrounds or parks such as that. So there would at least be something buffering between,
Buffer zone.
Yeah.
between the two. And then that would allow a lot more options to where it could be, plus some protection at least to the people we're trying to protect.
Will that give, I guess, an important thing is to ask the staff at that, gives them the tools that they feel like they need to implement the ordinance and be fair to.
Yeah, I mean, if we put it in there that it's prohibited to be directly adjacent to a property that, whether it's a public park or a church or house of worship, whatever, that would be at least one parcel between the church and where a dispensary would go.
Did we go through a similar
Yeah,
process here when the wet vote passed with the alcohol sales? Are there any similarities here
crossovers. That's a
I
good
think they
point.
had a distance requirement, and I don't know if that was state or, it did come up, because I remember discussing it when alcohol came in. It's where the liquor stores were allowed, and it seemed like there was some discussion on that Catholic Church and John O's.
They're close.
That's pretty close together,
Yeah.
but I don't remember what was done.
So what is our requirement? Do we have any requirements? For the
Do you know the
establishments that
ordinance?
sell alcohol?
It wouldn't be ours,
No.
right?
Do you know?
I think that comes from the state.
KRS.
I think it may
KRS
be.
on that. Is it?
Right, it
two-
is.
Is it 200 feet? Because we questioned that
Yeah,
when
we
they opened
did.
the convenience store there by the middle school.
Right, we did, and we couldn't change it. They were within that, within the state statute, and you can't change it.
Okay.
That's the way it is. That's already said, and Lori's right. She and I looked at, we had a question that came up on a different matter. And there was nothing we could do.
I like the term adjacent. However, we all understand what adjacent means. We have probably a broad definition, but we'd probably have to have a very narrow definition of what adjacent means, or we're gonna have somebody in front of us within a year. If we were to be awarded that, to try to, hey, does that mean within one lot? Does that mean, I've got the lot right behind? So I think we'd have to have a very narrow definition of adjacent.
Well, again, the mall would define that, because you've got one person owns it all. So you could say one guy owns it all, but he's got different businesses. So if he was one business up, that needs to be defined as such.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is adjoining a better or worse word, or is it the same word than adjacent?
I think it's very specific.
Partial or,
Don't you think it might be better to actually put some feet in there, just in some number of feet that, because, adjacent, you could still come within 10 feet later and put this thing here, and you're not, it's not really 15 feet or something like this. I mean, there are places that you could do that here in this city.
I'd like to do that, I just don't, my concern with that is there's never gonna be a number, I think, that we're happy with, because it's like, well, in this case, it's too much, in this case, it's too low. And I think what we're driving at is, again, we go back to schools and daycares are already taken care of, like, that's off our plate, somebody took care of that. And now we're either being concerned for things overly, or this is where this is where the devil's in the details in getting these things and getting them figured out correctly. And at the same time, not handing staff that has to administer this something unenforceable or something that's not practical for them to do, which just causes them more grief. So, Lori, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but you've heard the conversation. You sit in on a lot of council meetings and understand city business. Are these things worth addressing and looking at, or are we making a bigger deal than they should be, in your opinion?
No, I agree with you all. I think they're worth looking at because, as sitting here listening to you all, I agree, it's kind of hard to do the fees because, like you said, you've got Southgate Mall that, something could go in there. I don't know how we address that. It'd be fair to everybody if we put fees in there. But I don't know how you would word it otherwise either.
Yeah.
Well, what makes it difficult for us is we've got churches that have erected churches inside what we normally regard as commercial areas. And the old-time churches that we all remember that set up, that look like a church, but now we have churches that are in the shopping centers and, also, on Indian Hills Drive, Indian Hills out there, we've got a big church out there.
Yeah.
And we've got churches that are just all around, just every time you turn around, there's a church, Sometimes they're small and going in a garage, but it's a situation where there are churches.
And my guess, my presumption is that in some of those cases, that's deliberate in the nature of is taking the church to where you might not expect to see it. Some of it's out of necessity because that's where available real estate is. But if you just sit on your corner of the street and wait for people to come to you, then it's either take your ministry to them. So there will be some churches that perhaps look at it and said, well, we want to be in the middle of all that stuff because that's a better opportunity for us. But the majority of them are going to say, we want the protection or we want the buffer.
Well, the flip side to this Southgate Mall thing up there, that church is renting that property, and they can move out 2 weeks from now, and we've eliminated that guy from any chance of having, being able to rent that.
We've created a problem that doesn't otherwise exist.
And they don't own that building, I know, they rent it, so they could move at any time.
That fellow doesn't own that, does he?
No, it's, that's Jesse Blue, I think, still owns
He
that.
still owns that,
I
doesn't
think he does.
I heard
he?
Jason say that.
Okay, so it seemed like to me that we are not, we're not going to reach a firm consensus this evening. So I guess we need to find out what our marching orders are between now and the September meeting. And is there a way, whether it's a work session, whether it's a special called meeting, whether it's is there some way that we can solve these dilemmas? Because I know we're going to take these back to people that we're going to research more, you're going to have more introspect, you're going to have more discussion. Is there a way to get this language dialed in or a decision made so that we can have a hearing in the month of September? So that way we're giving maximum opportunity to whoever is downstream from us.
We won't be able to have it unless we do a special called meeting in September.
Would you prefer to have a special called meeting after our September meeting? Would you like to use the September meeting to lock this in and then have our hearing in a special called meeting?
I mean, we just had, is it 30 days for a publication?
Do what now?
When we do a text amendment like this, when we advertise the public hearing, is that one 30 days in advance? Or is it 21? 21 days, okay. So we have to have 21 days notice to the public that we're having that public hearing.
For a hearing?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, we can have a special called meeting for deliberations on the next one, and then try to schedule the hearing on a regular meeting date, or we can reconvene at our next regular meeting, and if we come to an agreement of what we want, then we can do a special called meeting for the actual hearing.
So I realize that I have just spoken on behalf of everyone else here. Is there any one of the things we can get this locked in tonight?
Yeah, my personal preference is, let's just go with the KRS. However, I'm very flexible on that. It's not it's not like I'm 90%, I think putting something in place so that city council can go ahead and get this passed and ready to go is more important than, anybody's particular, like, let's do it exactly this. So I'm flexible and willing to work.
Did anyone share in that?
Let me just say this, Mark, if I could. What about Tyler and Lori, next city council meeting, talking to them about it and seeing, get an idea of what they all think about it, what they'd like to do? It would give you an idea.
That would be a good idea, so we don't have,
Yeah.
that would give us more on the same page where it don't get kicked back
So
and
they'd be on the
forth.
same page.
More
and then
direction.
They kind of know how they would like to see you
We don't
go.
get kicked back and
You
forth.
don't have to go that way, but it would be good.
Well, and I'm hoping, I have a hunch, this conversation that we're having, once other people witness this conversation, we will have, some additional feedback. And so I guess the information that we're seeking is the areas of protection, whether they need to be church, park, playground, and residential. Because there are areas where the zones will meet. So we need to, do we protect them from an adjacency standpoint, an adjoining standpoint, or from a distance standpoint? And once we kind of get some consensus on where the council is and where maybe feedback from other stakeholders, so we need a distance or adjoining, and we need to know whether it's those three groups or any combination of those groups or none of those groups. Is
They
that,
may come back and they may just do like you said, Tim, they may say, no, we want you to just go by what the statute says, and that's it.
Make it more complicated than it is.
yeah, I mean, and that's kind of my fear is that, and that's one of the reasons I asked Lori, and I don't want to overthink it. But I also feel like the impetus is on us to figure it out because that's what our charge is and why it's worthy of having the discussion. So, can you just send any fact-finding that you're able to find? Can you just communicate that to us on what the barometer is on those things, and we'll... Dave, how much time do you need to get ready?
We don't need much time on this. After we get a decision, we can
Yeah.
put it together quickly. Tyler and I can-
Most of the stuff, like as far as the definitions and things go, are basically copy and paste from what KRS already
Yeah,
has.
they're easy to paste.
So those are okay. It's just, how do we want to word?
These are the big issues. You solve that and we won't have any problem with it.
Okay.
Or is it, are we saying that we might be able to still solve this and have it complete by the September meeting without a special call meeting?
We won't be able to have the hearing because we'll have to get with the council and get feedback, and then I'll have to bring that back to you.
We would have
So-
to announce, theoretically, we would have to announce the public hearing 7 days from now.
Yeah.
Right.
And the council doesn't meet for 7 days from now, so we could still have the public hearing in our October meeting. And then once that meeting's done, then we send it to the council for their second October meeting. So that gives them
So they would have it finished by
2
their
months.
first November meeting.
Well, they have.
Possibly.
They can do it in 2 meetings.
Yeah.
They can do it in 2 meetings. And so they actually can read it the first meeting and then they can adopt it the second meeting, so they don't have to wait 2 months. So they're pretty flexible.
Sure.
Right.
Well, and that's why, I mean, if the lottery were to go, were to go someone's way here locally, I just want to make sure that the city is poised for that and not, all along, if you've been part of previous meetings, for me, it was, I just had a philosophical problem with the state saying it was medicine and then forcing residents to go to another county or city to do it. So I don't want to be the ones that are being the holdup. I don't want us delaying to cause some entrepreneur somewhere who might be fortunate enough to have the opportunity that says, well, I would be in the business, but I, couldn't get any guidance from leadership.
There may be another way to do this, and maybe it's the easy way out, but let me ask this question. Hypothetically, if we just put forth the recommendation of the KRS, can the city council amend that, change that like
Yes.
they want to?
Yes, it's just like we send that to them, Tim, they can't.
Yeah, so here's what I'm thinking, rather than getting their feedback and then sending it back to us and taking a longer time, send it to them with the KRS, and then they can amend it like they want to. Just a thought.
It's the same process for them as it is for us. It just takes
Well,
the zoning, the planning commission out of it, basically.
No, they'd have to send it back to us now, Tim.
Oh, okay.
It would still have to come back either way.
Or yeah,
It has to come back to us.
Yeah.
In other words, they could say, no, that's not the way we want to do it, and they'd send it back to us, and we'd send it to them. And I think the timeline, I don't think there's anything, I think they'd get it done today.
I think we can.
You're talking about the end of
If we get
December.
pressed, they'll call a special call meeting.
So if they meet
No-
it twice.
no rush.
We got a long time, that's not a big deal, but I think that it could work with that problem.
I think we've also already established some boundaries, we're in ways we're telegraphing the direction that we're going, so a person could anticipate and say, well, these would be the maximums that they would be, and I can then use that to make some planning or speculate on, where I might choose to want to do business, et cetera. The only thing I would say, Tim, and maybe in January, you might have, or February or March, you might have a little different thought, is that some of what the council is counting on us to do is do the heavy lifting so that they get a recommendation that they're confident that's been vetted properly and can just move forward on without having to do it themselves.
I
So
see your point.
that's what we're
Prudent as well.
trying to do. So you'll be in a unique position where we have worn both hats, so you will know, you and George both, but.
There's the city council.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do
Third,
we want to look further as far as the size of the signs that we allow for this type of business? Some of the other ordinances have went in and reduced the allowable space for signs. Some of them have done some things that I don't think that we can do, but we can limit the size to a certain square footage. Because if we put these in a commercialized zone, they can have a 200 square foot sign.
Well, I like the one that Henderson did, if you look at it, and I talked, Tyler did too.
Yeah.
He and I both like that one. Exterior signage may only at most include text that is the signage's business or trade name, location, and contact information, and business type. Exterior signage cannot include a license, logo, symbol, branded colors, or any images, including but not limited to depicting cannabis or cannabis products, or the imagery or action of smoking, vaping. That's important, I think.
Yeah, I do too.
Exterior signs also cannot include mottos, selling messages, or any other non-essential text. Exterior signs must be on the same parcel as the store and affixed to a building or a permanent structure. That's like a signpost. Exterior signage cannot be larger than necessary to reasonably display the information on the sign to individuals within or near the licensed premises. And I'd put a percentage on it. Tyler and I talked about 100 square feet.
I'd say we limit it to 100 square feet.
And cannot be illuminated by neon lights.
cannot be.
Yeah. I
I
don't,
like the way they did theirs. Personally, I thought they did a good job with Sanderson's.
I don't know if we can tell them though what the sign can say or what it can have on it.
Well, I think we could try.
We could put it in there, but we might not be able to enforce that fully.
I'd love to see a sign that doesn't, I'd love to see a sign that doesn't have people smoking marijuana.
Oh, yeah.
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 That's my personal opinion.
I agree.
That's just
Well,
personally on my-
and obviously, there's, the way we look at political speech and, that commercial type speech there is a differentiation between that. But so what that does is, I think most of us that have either traveled around or seen movies and television, we know what that green cross looks like. And it's typically neon, and that's the universal symbol for dispensary, I believe.
Yeah.
And so Henderson at least has decided that that symbol is not to be used
They said that.
because it
Yeah,
says no
No
neon.
symbols and no neon.
No neon light.
They're getting away with it,
Yeah.
Well,
for now.
it's in there, I don't know.
All of these are new, and none of them have been challenged. But I will presume that even though there are municipalities in Kentucky that are ahead of us, my guess is they didn't invent fire. They have adopted things that have stood up to challenge in other communities. So we're kind of late to the party on this
So-
whole thing. So we have the benefit of learning from
As
others.
far as the signs, do we want to just take what Henderson did and then put a size limitation to it?
Do we want to go that far?
I would make that motion now.
That makes sense.
I would
like
agree
it.
with that too.
Okay, so do we want to go half and do 100 square feet of what's currently allowable? That's a 10 by 10 sign.
That's a big sign.
Yeah, I think that's fine, because remember, even though most of the businesses would disagree with this, the signs are for the benefit of the public, not for the business. They're supposed to be wayfinding, and they're supposed to direct traffic. They're not supposed to be just direct advertising. So we can't make them so small that the consumer can't find them, but then you also can't just allow anything goes.
I think this is gonna be one store they'll find.
Well, and that's, again, if we go back to the very beginning, is much of this conversation is not about one, but the things that we are deciding now hopefully save us trouble in the future when something comes up and goes, oh, we already addressed that. And we have some influence. But yes, for now, it's certainly not going to be a big problem, and the people who need to know where it is are going to know, because it's not your gas station on every corner type of thing. And it will be interesting to me to see how the geography of it shakes out. So, I mean, it's hard to believe that E-Town could lose the lottery. That's
Is the lottery,
Yeah.
is it a city or a jurisdiction, or is it an individual? I mean, as a businessman, can you get in the lottery, or is it just municipalities getting it? Does anybody know?
I don't know.
The business owner is the one that gets in the lottery. They have to pay an application fee and send it in to even be
So
considered.
anybody in the state of Kentucky can apply for the lottery?
Yes,
As an individual?
yes.
And he could put it in E-Town if he got the lottery, or
Well,
put it here?
he has to apply for the city that he wants it in,
Okay.
right? Or he or she. And if that city gets drawn for the lottery, then they can put it there.
And so there are 4 for our 9-county district, is that right? For now, or 6? 4?
4.
For now. So, and I guess the lottery,
Is it 11 in Lincoln Trail?
Campbellsville is part of that.
it was a little different, though. I thought the way that the zone was for this particular district wasn't your traditional Lincoln Trail entirely.
I think so. Yeah, I think you're right, Mark. I don't think
But,
it was.
and then one county so far that I know of opted out completely.
Was that me? What county was it?
It was over on the other side of Barron County.
Metcalf.
Metcalf, yes.
It started with an E on
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
So, but in this case, and the reason that I was looking kind of at geographically in my mind was Hart County, Grayson County, Breckenridge County, Meade County. So when we're at the western end, but we're centered north to south. So from a practical standpoint, if you're trying to spread 4 out, and I don't care what anyone says, one's going in Hardin County, that they will, but it would make more sense to spread them out vertically because of the shape, but that might not be how it goes. You know, there might be Washington County, Nelson County, Hardin County, Hart County. You know, they might be gathered that way, but,
There's 12 counties in our region.
Campbellsville's in it.
say that again?
12 counties in our region. and-
12.
And Marion is actually the one, Metcalf is not in our region. Marion County and is in there, but now that it's Greene County is the one that opted out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Greene County is
Greene
out.
County opted out.
How many for our entire region? It's just,
4
there's 4 for that.
for the
Do
region.
you see, I'm just trying to
11
think, like you
that
said,
have
long-term
opted
down
in.
the line as far as forecasting, but do you see some businesses taking advantage of like our apartments, I'm thinking business suites, of building up instead of building out? Vacant spots, do we have to clarify that for the long term? I'm thinking of like Indian Hills Shopping Center right up from Farmers where there are businesses in that 2-story building. I just wonder if that's going to be something we have to look at long term.
It's got apartments up above it too, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
Above the businesses.
Yeah,
Yeah, that would be, to me, the market will sort that itself out. If someone,
Okay.
thought that was viable, or there were, proper elevator or, access, and I think that's,
I'm
it's a
thinking
good
of.
point. I hadn't thought of it, but I
I'm
mean,
thinking of larger cities, for example, with Bowling Green. Bowling Green takes advantage of that now. So I just wondered if that's something that you see will emulate itself into our areas as well.
Are you talking about mixed-use
Yeah,
zones?
yeah.
That's on my agenda for going forward at
I
a
just
different
wonder-
meeting.
Yeah, I just wonder about that long term because I could see that being something that would kind of overflow into here for the long term.
I think it needs to.
Yeah,
Right now, we have one zone that permits that,
right.
and we don't have very many properties in that zone, so.
Right.
Like I said, it's on an agenda for a different meeting.
Yeah,
we're seeing more of it in a certain area of town. I can see where it's going to become more
right.
requested or useful. Okay, so we're in agreement on the sign language, and then we're just going to source out some guidance. We're going to take the temperature of some others on the adjoining versus adjacent or the distant, and then we'll be ready to make a decision in our September meeting, and then we'll go from there.
We've got to commit to the zones we're allowing, and then we've got to commit to basically the distance versus the adjoining, and basically, is that it? Is that the two?
And is it churches, parks, playgrounds, and residential?
Yes.
Or
What are
one
we-
of those three, none of those
Okay.
three, or
So
all of those
Those
three?
three items is what we need to
Mm-hmm.
address.
I keep going back to Burnside, where it mentions a cannabis business shall not be located within, of course, it says the feet, which we would need to clarify, but it does say a recreational facility or property, and then it put playground, park, pool, or water attraction used by youth. I like how that's laid out.
Yeah, I think that requirement, the way that it is fine. I think 1,000 feet is excessive, and I didn't know Burnside was 1,000 feet, but
Yeah.
it's,
It's a bit much, but yeah.
yeah. So I think we're going to be, it would be, if we pursue a distance, it's gonna have to be far less than
Right.
than those. But again, to Dave's recommendation, I like what he said, the feet, but it's never going to be, rarely going to be convenient.
Right.
Where we go, well, it'd be okay in this case if it were.
But it's never going to be fair.
That's right.
Yeah.
So it's,
It won't be.
and then that brings us to kind of where Tim is just let the market decide and,
You got 11 counties,
Yeah.
you got 4 slots.
1 in 3 chance here, isn't it?
I know.
I would bet it doesn't happen. If I was a gambler.
it will be, and it will be interesting to see though, when the next round will go, because it will implement, and then they'll judge supply and demand, and they'll go, how much commerce is migrating back and forth? And we kind of know we know where the hub of commerce is here in our region. And so that will have some bearing on it because they like the traffic in and out.
Right.
But we like the traffic from Hart County and from Breckinridge County and from Edmonson County and that's the other thing to remember, is that these are the districts that we're in, or the regions that we're in, but the consumer doesn't adhere to those. The consumer goes to wherever the consumer wants to go. So if one is here, then you have all the surrounding counties. You have northern Edmonson County, you have southern Breckinridge County, you have eastern Ohio County, you have eastern Butler County that are all banking on Litchfield or,
Well, the hospital's going to have some effect on it because they're going to have prescriptions from doctors, and there's more doctors in Litchfield than there are in a lot of places.
Yep.
Right.
That's right. So, okay, is there anything else we need to know or discuss on this issue before we take this and do our due diligence?
One other thing is the regulatory fees. They will directly come through the planning commission, from what I gathered with the conversation from Sabrina. She was planning on being here, but something come up that she couldn't make it. But I've got some sample ordinances that she sent regarding regulatory fees, and I'll send them out to you all as well. So basically, we would have the power to set those.
Thank you for bringing that up, because I was going to mention that. Because I know you thought the other day that they wasn't going to approve you all.
Yep.
I'm pretty sure they're all going to be going to go through planning.
Yep.
Mark, is it also the purview of planning and zoning to set hours of operation?
I would say not.
No.
I don't think we're going to have that authority.
No. I mean, we do sometimes travel beyond use, but our primary mission is land use at its core. There are people that would like us to get into legislating taste, but unfortunately, we can't.
Might be stretching it a little.
Yeah.
So as we've laid this out, then what is the opportunity for us to get feedback from the general public? Are we kind of to do that on
Public hearing.
our own, or will
We
that be?
advertise it
Yeah.
just like we do,
Okay.
and then we'll have a public hearing on
Okay.
And that's where we'll get the feedback,
it. Right.
any feedback that exists. On the regulatory fee side, I know from a permit standpoint, that type of thing, we often scale hours based upon, well, we're smaller, et cetera.
I
Just,
think we need to get away from that.
it's an even playing field, whatever it costs to do business for a building permit somewhere else, And especially in this area, because this is a unique area, and this regulatory fee is just set it where fair market value is and let it be that.
Yeah, we've changed some of those. Tyler and I went through those, been some time ago, if you'll all remember, because they were just antiquated.
Yeah, yeah.
We did very little. We need to really look at
Need to
them.
really look a lot more.
Yeah, it's worth reviewing those and setting them to what is fair based upon, and I guess I'll say on behalf of the way they were set, in the mid to late 90s, is that the end user, the consumer now that gets that permit is getting a whole lot more service than they were in the late 90s when planning was new to the community and we were just kind of adopting this and people were finding their way. But in the year 2024, they're getting a tremendous value for the service when they come to us. And so it's worthy of a comparable fee that they're going to spend to do business in any other town. So let's not be afraid of setting them fairly to both parties.
Right.
All right. Anybody have anything else they want to include? I thank you all for your discussion and your work that we will do over the next month of this. Is there anything else before we adjourn?
I want to bring one thing up, Mark.
Yeah, Dave.
If you could. Tyler and I would love to finish this comprehensive plan, and what we'd like to do, what we'd like to recommend to you, we know that the future land use portion is the only thing we lack. And if, with your permission, he and I will try to give you our recommendation. Is that the way you'd like to do it, or do you all want to have a working session? You all do it, and or us give you our recommendation first? I think you're going to agree with what we put together. I don't think there's much we can change.
I think that considering where we are and the timeline and the work that we already have invested is we need to probably with haste move forward. So we would love a recommendation unless I hear someone dissent to that opinion.
I agree.
You don't need to make a motion. We just need to know where you want to go, and that's what Tyler and I thought we would do, but we want to make sure.
I think that'd be the most efficient way to do it. So you're free to fly on that.
And then we'd like to finish this thing.
Lori, you have anything for us? Do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion.
Kendall with a motion to adjourn. Do I have a second?
Second.
George with a second. All in favor, say aye.